Hello, and thank you for joining us on behalf of UDA, Marion Square, and Caresoft. I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, GAO Insights Moving from Quantum Policy to Implementation in Federal Agencies. To tell you a little bit about Caresoft, we are the trusted government IT solutions provider supporting federal, state, and local government, education, healthcare, and private sector industries. We connect our customers across the US and Canada with thousands of technology vendors, resellers, system integrators, and managed service providers to deliver a comprehensive range of solutions and services to meet organizations' needs. Caresoft, in conjunction with our vendor partners, is pleased to host and sponsor thousands of educational and informational events each year, ranging from webinars to accredited trainings, trade shows, roundtable discussions, technology forums, user groups, and more. Caresoft holds a wide variety of schedules, contracts, and purchasing agreements that streamline and simplify the IT procurement process. As the master government aggregator, our vendor, reseller, and integrator partners, Caresoft has assembled a comprehensive IT solutions portfolio that includes products and services across multiple technology verticals to support organizations with mission-focused solutions for quantum, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, customer experience, emerging technology, FedRAMP, 5G, and more. And at this time, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers for today. Harvey Morrison, co-founder and CEO, Marion Square, and Bob Gorley, co-founder and CTO at UDA. Harvey, the floor is yours.
So, good afternoon, everyone. And again, thanks for joining us. As Jennifer said, my name is Harvey Morrison, CEO of Marion Square. And today we're going to discuss what I believe is one of the most important long-term modernization and cybersecurity challenges facing federal agencies. And that's really operationalizing quantum readiness. The discussion that we're going to have today is inspired by a recent GAO report, which highlights the growing, oh, sorry, the lights went off here. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. The discussion is inspired by a recent GAO report, which highlights the growing challenge really across government. And that is, I think agencies understand quantum technologies are coming. Agencies understand there are both opportunities and risks associated with quantum, but many are still struggling with what I think are very practical questions. And that is, like, how do we begin with quantum? And that's what really today is all about. This is not intended to be a highly technical discussion about quantum physics or future theoretical systems. This is really a discussion about execution, how agencies prepare, how agencies prioritize, how agencies align initiatives with broader modernization efforts. And lastly, how agencies begin building long-term organizational readiness around quantum. And importantly, I think today is not simply about identifying the problem. We're also going to walk through a practical 4-step framework agencies can use to begin building a structured and operationally realistic quantum readiness strategy. Throughout the discussion today, we're going to use post-quantum cryptography as a practical example of what operationalizing quantum actually looks like inside of real federal environments. And ultimately, this discussion is really about helping agencies move from awareness into execution. So as Jennifer mentioned, I'm joined today by Bob Gorley from UDA. I'm really excited about this. I've known Bob for a good while, and I know he's going to be able to provide some really interesting insights and perspectives on this entire quantum ecosystem. So Bob, thanks for joining. Maybe take just a minute and introduce yourself to everybody.
Great. Thanks, Harvey. Well, I'm Bob Gorley, and I tell people I'm on my third career. My first career was as a Navy intelligence officer, and my kind of intelligence was bringing all the data together and figuring out what adversaries are doing in dynamic situations. And that career lasted until 2002. And I wanted to mention, even in that career, we were talking about quantum and the coming age of quantum. The federal government has been involved in quantum and aware of things like Shor's algorithm since the mid 90s. The first quantum working group that I could find in history occurred in 1998. There may have been some before, but I just want to mention that because quantum's been around for a long time and the government's been trying to get ready and raising awareness. My second career was as a chief technology officer at TRW, which was one of the great integrators for the defense community. We were acquired by Northrop Grumman, where I was a chief technology officer. And then I went back into government as a chief technology officer at the Defense Intelligence Agency. There too, lots of enterprise IT work and tracking the quantum issue. That was the second career phase. This third career I'm on now for the last 12 years has been advising companies on accelerating technology for enterprise use, is the short way to put it, including tracking quantum. I'm a member of the DEF CON Quantum Village. I really enjoy working with quantum hackers and tracking where all this incredible technology is going. So that's me in a nutshell. Oh, one other thing I'd mention, the UDA network, 350 executives that we work with trying to track the future. This gives us insight into what people are really interested in, and quantum is a frequent topic. So everybody's trying to get their hands around this.
Yeah, Bob, it's been real interesting to watch quantum really kind of evolve over the last sort of 24 months, even. I know it's been tracked a lot in the past, but the last 24 months, it's really seemed to pop up. And again, not just quantum computing, but also quantum encryption, quantum sensing, quantum networking. It's been really interesting to follow the arc of this space. So looking forward to the discussion today. Abby, if you go to the next slide, please. You can skip that one. There we go. Yeah. So just a real quick for those of you who don't know who Marion Square is. At Marion Square, we're an advisory firm that works with both federal agencies and technology companies to really help bridge the gap between emerging technology and real world operational execution. We work with a wide variety of tech areas ranging from cyber to big data to AI and quantum. And over the last several years, a major focus area for us has been helping organizations understand and operationalize quantum readiness, particularly around post quantum cryptography and long term modernization planning, workforce enablement, which we're going to talk a lot about today, Bob, and crypto agility. So our work really spans both helping agencies think through governance, long term plans, those types of things, and then working with technology companies to align their solutions to help operationalize problems and modernization priorities across government. So we're a proud Caresoft partner and been working with these folks for many years. So again, thanks for hosting us here today. So let's get ready and kind of hop in. If you go to the next slide, please, Abby. All right, just a quick okay. So before we dive in, I think to the broader discussion, I want to quickly frame how we're going to approach today's session. So first, we'll spend some time discussing the broader federal quantum landscape. So why agencies are focused on quantum now, what the opportunities and risks look like, and why GAO identified operational execution as a growing challenge. From there, we'll discuss what I believe is the real issue facing agencies today, and that's what Bob and I have talked about or talking about is this execution gap. So it's not awareness, it's not policy, but it's really operationalizing quantum within a federal agency. And then we'll walk through a practical four-step framework agencies can use to begin building a structured quantum readiness strategy. And this framework is really designed specifically for federal environments where you've got a large agency, lots of legacy systems, multiple modernization programs underway, complex vendor ecosystem, and then really long operational timelines. And then finally, we're going to use post-quantum cryptography as a topic that is coming up more and more as a practical operational example of how agencies can begin translating quantum strategy actually into execution. So Abby, if you go to the next slide, please. So the recent GAO report highlights something we've consistently seen in conversations across the federal landscape. awareness about quantum is really no longer a problem. I think agencies understand that quantum technologies are strategically important. They understand with quantum their long-term implications for areas like cybersecurity, modernization, and national security. And agencies understand, I think, that quantum technologies are moving from research environments into operational planning discussions. But despite this awareness, many agencies still struggle to move from policy into execution. And that was highlighted in the GAO report. And because of this, I think agencies risk falling into a dangerous position where they're neither fully preparing for security disruption quantum creates, nor positioning themselves to take advantage of the operational and mission benefits quantum technologies may be able to offer. One of the biggest challenges is that quantum readiness is not simply a technology issue, it's an organizational readiness issue, in my opinion. And most agencies today do not yet have a quantum enabled workforce, clearly established governance structures around quantum, defined operational ownership, or practical modernization roadmaps tied to quantum transition. And because quantum touches so many areas in an organization or an agency, ranging from cybersecurity, infrastructure, AI, sensing, long-term mission architecture, agencies I think are really struggling to determine where things like quantum fits into their environment. Who owns quantum from an organizational perspective? How do you prioritize quantum once you've got all your priorities? Like, where does it fall? And really, I think fundamentally, how do you operationalize quantum, not just as a particular program, but across your enterprise? At the same time, I think agencies are trying to navigate like how they do this transition inside of really complex environments, right? That government has with legacy infrastructure, workforce limitations, constrained budgets. And as a result, I think many agencies really kind of have remained stuck in this planning and assessment cycle without a clear operational path forward. And that's really what the GAO report is highlighting, the growing gap between quantum awareness and execution and quantum execution. What GAO I think is really identifying is what I would call is again this quantum execution gap. Agencies understand the strategic problem, but still lack practical operation models for, and we've talked about it, workforce enablement, prioritization, phased implementation. And this is really the gap we want to talk about today. So Bob, I'll pause here. I've talked a good bit about GAO and I think sort of set the groundwork, but I want to get your perspective on what do you believe the GAO report is really signaling to federal agencies about the current state of quantum readiness across government?
Well, Harvey, I think you nailed it, frankly. That GAO report does talk about quantum computing is coming and it tells you the different kinds, but that's not the purpose of this report. We all know quantum computing is coming, and we all know quantum sensing is here already, and we know there's breakthroughs in quantum communications. That was not the message of the report. The message was, as you said here, there's plenty of awareness now, and that is good, but it's not sufficient. We have to transition this awareness into action. And that was
Yep.
to me, the entire theme of the report. Yeah, it's good that we're aware. Let's keep the awareness up, but it's got to transition to action.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there wholeheartedly. We've been in the quantum space for a good while, talking to quantum compute companies and sensing companies, and I think there are everyday use cases today, things like optimization, right, where you
Mhm.
could leverage a quantum computer, but I just don't think organizations today are thinking about that as an option. They think about quantum as like a, hey, it's in a lab, it's kind of way out there, and they don't know that hey, you can access quantum on Amazon Bracket right now, or you can access quantum in the Azure cloud right now and actually run optimization types of things on it. So there's the ability to start to integrate it, but I think there's a mind shift that has to happen in order for them to be able to take advantage of this
Yes, and
capabilities.
you can use quantum navigation capabilities, and the military's already doing that. And you can use quantum effects to generate encryption keys, and many are doing that. But the issue is as you've mentioned, It's organizational and leadership. How do we really optimize this? How do we shift from broad awareness and proof of concepts to real action-oriented capabilities?
Agreed. Agreed. Okay, Abby, next slide, please. So when most agencies today, oh, we have a polling question. We'll pause here for a minute, Bob.
Okay.
All right, I'll go ahead and dive in here now. When most agencies today hear the word quantum, the conversation I think immediately shifts, and rightly so, to cybersecurity and the future risks quantum computing may pose to current encryption standards. And while that is absolutely, I think, an important part of this discussion, particularly when thinking about, post-quantum cryptography, longer-term data protection, I think it's only one piece of a much larger technology transition now beginning to emerge. Quantum technologies are expected to influence a wide range of mission and modernization areas across government. Areas such as we mentioned, Bob, optimization. There's also logistics, advanced modeling. I think there's a whole webinar discussion we could have for an hour or more, Bob, around AI acceleration and quantum, sensing, navigation, and communications. I think this means quantum is simply not, as everybody I think initially thinks, a cybersecurity issue or just quantum compute. I think it's increasingly becoming a broader modernization, operationalization, strategic planning issue for federal agencies. On the positive side of quantum technologies have the potential, I think, to significantly improve how agencies process data, model complex environments, optimize large scale operations, and support mission decision making, whether it's in logistics at DoD, advanced modeling inside of Department of Energy, next generation sensing capabilities for defense and homeland security, or again, as we talk, this convergence of AI and quantum enabled analytics. I think agencies are starting to begin to recognize that quantum could eventually reshape portions of the federal technology landscape. At the same time, quantum also, and it's kind of a double-edged sword here, right, Bob? Also introduces significant operational and security disruptions, right? Most notably with, the future vulnerability of current cryptography standards, RSA, harvest now, decrypt later, long-term exposure risk associated with sensitive government data. Again, that goes back to harvest now, decrypt later. And I think a growing concern around how legacy infrastructure and vendor ecosystems can adapt over time to support quantum. And I think this duality of quantum is important because agencies are not simply preparing for a future cyber threat, which I know gets a lot of the attention, but I think they're also preparing for a broader technology transition that I think will really influence everything, right? From modernization planning, infrastructure strategy, obviously cybersecurity architecture, and then long-term design across the enterprise. And I think this is one of the key reasons the GAO report is so important. The report is simply not warning agencies about a cyber risk, right, which most folks think about, but it's highlighting that federal organizations really need to begin thinking operationally about how quantum technologies, both the opportunities that it provides and the disruptions, really intersect with modernization planning that's going on today. So Bob, kind of bring you back in, get your thoughts. Like a lot of the public discussion around quantum, I know focuses heavily on cyber and encryption and to some extent compute. But from your perspective, where do you see sort of the biggest long-term operational opportunities around quantum for government today that folks should be considering?
Well, thanks for asking that because, like you, I see, cybersecurity is so very important and post-quantum cryptography is so very, very important. But sometimes it seems like it sucks all the air out of the room
Yep.
because it's so important and people haven't focused on it enough. So it becomes the dominant conversation when there are so many other use cases of the ones you list here. If we think just from a financial standpoint, look at the logistics spend.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Defense Logistics Agency and Transcom and Department of War. $100 billion to move things from one place to another. What
Yep.
if through optimization we could save 10% of that? That is
Yes.
serious money. $10
Yep.
billion dollars a year in savings just from that one use case. And the others there that could have a tremendous impact on the quality of human life for our citizens. If we can make these big breakthroughs in drug discovery and healthcare. So very excited about the operational missions. In the intelligence community, there's so much of a need for like simulations of potential adversary courses of action that would run much better once we have good quantum computing. So very excited about the optimistic side of this and the use cases. So let's go ahead and quickly as we can, solve these issues with post-quantum cryptography. This is a very solvable issue. We need to follow the framework you're about to present, but we can do this.
Yep. No, I agree. And again, I look at it. I was reading an article the other day that talked about, the new sort of tracking mechanism for who's going to be the most powerful in the world. And a lot of it comes down to compute power, right? Compute power because it drives AI, it drives all these other things. And I think figuring out how we're going to leverage a quantum computer for things like AI is ultimately critical for national security and all the other things from healthcare discovery and those sorts of areas. But I think fundamentally, from a national security perspective, having a quantum infrastructure that can help us dramatically scale things like AI, things like optimization. I mean, you think about, there's been a lot of money spent in government now around contested logistics and how do we solve those problems. I think quantum can really be inserted there and to solve those kinds of issues. I don't know about if you've got any thoughts on the whole AI perspective and how quantum and AI are coming together, but I think that's going to be an interesting spot for organizations to really kind of look at and see how you can integrate AI into those workflows.
Yeah, one way to think about that is, currently everything is digital. It's binary ones or zeros in all these computers, even if they're using a large language model. The large language models may be reaching the end of their exponential growth and capability. There's a new kind of model that's being worked on called a world model, which is going to continue to advance artificial intelligence. But still, it doesn't have the power of quantum computing. If you have quantum computing mixed with artificial intelligence, you can make these things think even more like humans. When we humans read something complex, for example, if we don't understand a word, we read through it quickly, we make assumptions on what it may be, we can come back to it later and figure out what the word's meaning really is. You can do that with AI once you have quantum computing,
Yep.
where you can have multiple states at once as you're thinking
Yep.
through things. So quantum computing could be how we finally get to truly powerful artificial intelligence. There are some
Yep.
hybrids out there now. D-Wave is working so closely with NVIDIA. NVIDIA is working to do pre-processing on a lot of different quantum capabilities. So we've already kind of got that hybrid, but I'm excited for the real application of quantum computing to artificial intelligence.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. And then again, what we're going to talk about in more detail here is not just, hey, quantum compute as a standalone solution, but how should agencies start to think about integrating quantum compute into their overall architecture, their overall modernization initiatives, and not just quantum compute, but other sorts of quantum capabilities. And again, that's what we're going to dig into more here. It's not about a standalone one-off project, but how should you start to think about? And I think that's what GAO is asking agencies to think about: is how do you integrate this across the enterprise? Kind of like what we're doing with AI now. Is how are you embedding AI into the workflow and the infrastructures? Quantum is, I think, is going to follow very quickly behind this and be a real driver and enabler. Next slide, please, Abby. So I believe this slide really captures the core issue facing federal agencies today when it comes to quantum readiness. At this point, most agencies understand that quantum technologies could have a significant implication for agency operations, national security, modernization, long term technology strategy. there's a growing awareness across government that quantum may even or eventually influence areas like advanced analytics, optimization, cybersecurity, broader mission decision making in general. But again, despite the awareness, many agencies, I think, still struggle from moving from policy discussions and research initiatives into operational execution. And because of this, agencies risk falling into a position where they are neither adequately preparing for the disruption quantum technologies may create, nor positioning themselves to take advantage of the potential operational and mission benefits quantum technologies may eventually enable or provide, right? So it's really a double-edged sword here. The more you dive into quantum, spend more on quantum, make quantum better on one side to make the organization more productive, more efficient, those sorts of things. On the other side, you also have the risk of, harvest now to crypt later, all the other things that those advances now take. And organizations need to be thinking, or agencies need to be thinking about how do you integrate and manage both of those. So, again, as we've talked and as the GAO report highlights, one of the biggest challenges is that quantum readiness is not simply a technology issue. It's more and more we're seeing an organizational readiness issue. So most agencies today still don't have clearly established governance structures, defined operational ownership around quantum. Again, we're going to hit this a few times, but workforce enablement strategies. You can't expect folks to go out and execute and implement on quantum strategies and roadmaps if they're not properly enabled around quantum capabilities and what they need to do. I think, or practical modernization roadmaps, right, that agencies are putting together tied to quantum transition or quantum migration. And because quantum, I think, intersects with so many areas or has the potential to intersect with so many areas across the enterprise, agencies are struggling to determine where quantum fits in that enterprise, who owns it, and how to prioritize it, and then how to operationalize it in a realistic way. Right. And then again, agencies, we've hit it, right? They're attempting to navigate this transition inside of environments that are already running. We have legacy systems that maybe not support quantum. We already have roadmaps put out. So how do we integrate that advanced capability and technology into this environment, right? And so again, I think organizations, because of this, are really kind of stuck in this planning and analysis, and they really need to get out of that and get into the execution, right? And I think that agencies will succeed over the next several years will likely not simply be the ones that understand quantum conceptually. They'll be the ones that establish the operational governance, the workforce readiness, the prioritization frameworks that are capable of turning awareness of quantum into action. And, Bob, one of the themes we've discussed is that the challenge, I think, is no longer awareness. It's really operational execution. And from that perspective, where are agencies in your mind struggling the most operationally today, perhaps?
I think a lot of people are struggling. First, we hit it three times already. Awareness to execution, it's hard. And so a default is to think, oh, this quantum stuff is a technical thing. I'll give it to my CIO to fix. Well, it's not just a technical thing. As we've
Yeah.
mentioned, it's an organizational leadership thing. I think agencies should consider taking a business leader, executive, and pointing at them and saying, you are responsible for ensuring our quantum policies here are focused on the mission.
Yep.
Technology is critically important, but it's a business gap that needs to be addressed to really operationalize this. So that's my one tip for getting things done. There should be one person in charge, at least a leader who is the focal point in a big agency. And my recommendation would be that should not be the CIO. The CIO's got to be your partner and execution participant, but this is a business topic and something that the agency head himself or herself should be take responsibility for as well. One thing that you and I have both talked about for a long time, Harvey, is although quantum physics can get very complicated and very technical, it's actually pretty easy to understand the important stuff and what's really important about these capabilities. And I think no leader should be afraid of taking this task on, even if you spent your life in the business side of the agency.
No, I'm 100% in agreement with you. And I think it's a situation where I think you hit the nail on the head there is you don't have to understand how quantum works at the molecular level to be somebody that leads change in quantum. I think what you have to understand is the business processes and the programs that are out there that can benefit from quantum, right? And then be able to figure out how to integrate that in. I think that's going to be the key piece, and we'll cover that from to operationalize quantum within an agency. Again, I don't have to know how to code software. I don't have to know how to, technically integrate it into a system, a quantum computer. But what I need to have an understanding is these are the programs that can benefit from quantum and be able to build the business case to be able to go out and start to integrate quantum into those environments. So I
Yeah.
don't know if you've got any extra thoughts on that, Bob, but that's kind of what I'm thinking about as I look at this.
No, I think that's just spot on. And so, for the kind of leader that needs to lead this, someone who understands governance and how to lead
Yep,
people and how to manage people and manage programs, that's the kind of person we need. Someone who understands the
exactly.
business of the agency.
Exactly. And then where quantum can be of value, because I think that's going to be key. It's almost like when you look at AI and folks ask, well, why don't we just do this with AI? The question really needs to be is, well, does AI actually make it better, or are we just throwing AI at it because we want to throw AI at something? It's the same, I think, question around quantum. Hey, does quantum actually make this better than what we're doing today? And if it does, great. Let's go into it. But we don't want to run around like we did early in the days of throwing AI at everything, right? There are certain businesses and use cases where AI really works and are effective. So we need the folks to be able to identify that and do that kind of work. Abby, if you would go to the next slide for, oh, we have a question here. Great. And I would remind everybody as we're going through, we're checking the chat. So if you've got questions that you want to ask, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A section. We'll try to get them as Bob and I are going through. I'd like to answer them in real time if we can. All right, so I want to spend a few minutes talking about what I believe is one of the most important themes highlighted throughout the GAO report. And again, we've talked about it. That's organizational readiness and workforce enablement. Because when people think about quantum readiness, the conversation usually shifts almost immediately towards technology. Bob, you and I were chatting about that, right? People think about quantum computing, cryptography, advanced research or future technical capabilities. But one of the key realities highlighted in the GAO report is that many agencies are still in the early stage of building internal expertise, governance structures, and the operational readiness to actually execute against these long-term quantum challenges. Quantum, as we've seen, and if you do any research in the space, is no longer isolated in research environments or just a cybersecurity discussion. Now, 24, 36 months ago, I'd probably nod and say, yeah, it probably still is research, more research. But over the last year or so, it's really kind of come out of that. And I think quantum, as you'll see if you follow it, it increasingly touches or should be touching an agency as they do modernization planning, operational strategy. Hey, what's our AI and AI infrastructure look like? And because of this, I think many agencies are still trying to determine, as we talked, Bob, where quantum fits organizationally, who owns it, and again, how do you operationalize it? Which is why I think one of the first barriers agencies face is not technological, it's organizational. So most agencies today, and I think you hit it, Bob, don't have, from what we see, a clear governance structure around quantum, workforce readiness strategies around quantum, or enterprise-wide operational roadmaps tied to quantum. Like, where are we going to start to insert quantum and the timeframes around that? And I think without this foundational element, organizations again are experiencing kind of delayed decision making, fragmented efforts on how to bring something in, a quantum solution in, and really kind of a wait and see sort of paralysis, where agencies sort of recognize quantum's important, but again struggle to identify or put this practical path forward. Um, and I think this is one of the most important takeaways from the GAO report, right? Federal agencies really cannot operationalize quantum readiness if workforce, leadership structure, governance model, and modernization strategies are not operationally prepared first. Because ultimately, agencies are not simply preparing for a technology shift, they're really preparing for long term to transition, that's transformation, if you will, of the agency. Almost like what we talked about with AI, right? There's going to be a major transformation, and you have to have these things in place first in order to be able to do that. So Bob, as you look at this, I know you've talked about it, but how important really is organizational readiness and workforce enablement, as you look at this discussion we're having today?
Well, it's clear to me this is the single most important prerequisite. If you don't have this, you might be making a little bit of progress here and there, but it's the single most important prerequisite this to real operational organizational readiness. It's this governance. How are you going to make enterprise decisions regarding taking advantage of this quantum revolution and protecting yourself from the quantum threats both? So I'm with you, and I'm with the GAO report here. It is the most important action to take.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just reading an attendee here that talked about budget is really kind of the root cause of everything when you look at this quantum migration. And I would say you're probably correct because we do a lot of work in the budgets here at Marion Square, looking at the budgets, breaking down the budgets, helping organizations think about the budgets. And one of the things that we found, well, again, I think you're correct, is you're not going to go into agencies, and this is where I think agencies need to think about it, and actually technology companies need to reorient too. Is don't go in looking for a straight line that says this is to buy a quantum solution. What I think you need to think about is we have a budget set aside to do, I'm making this up, optimization. Well, the first thing somebody thinks about is, well, optimization, it doesn't say quantum, so I'm going to get a high performance compute environment and run it. What you really should be thinking about is, I need the fastest, most wide rangingest type of computer to be able to run these optimization scenarios. Let me go buy that. I have budget for that. It's not going to say a budget for a quantum computer in there. You got to start thinking about how you integrate quantum into existing modernizations and programs and strategies. And it's just a tool that you will utilize to solve that particular problem. Again, you're thinking more than likely high performance compute, but you should start to think about, are there other ways to do that? I don't know, Bob, maybe get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, no, I think just as an example, I mentioned earlier Defense Logistics Agency. And what if there could be an optimization of logistics? I would love to be the guy who gets to claim I saved 10% of $100 billion budget. And I think leaders inside DLA have the opportunity to make that vision and move towards it, even if nobody has come to them and said that you must do that or here's a budget for that. So sometimes vision comes before budget. And even in this complicated government world, agencies can get proactive and come up with realistic scenarios of what could be as soon as these quantum computers progress more and start building plans now for taking advantage of things like this. And then that same example goes for all the other use cases you started out with, Harvey.
Yep.
And there have been recent government grants for the application of artificial intelligence to science. I think we'll see the same thing for the application of quantum to science. Just last week, there were announcements of grants into the quantum computing consortia, quantum computing companies, good American companies advancing in quantum computing. these breakthroughs are coming and coming fast, and we need to be building our use cases for them before we get the budget.
Yeah. And again, I wouldn't wait for a quantum line item in the budget. If you're dealing with a problem now or a modernization program now, consider quantum. Like look at see if the solutions are out there and just integrate it into a current program. Don't wait for a quantum specific program, if you will.
Yeah,
Next
it makes
slide,
a lot of
please.
sense.
So I think now that we've discussed some of the organizational and operational challenges highlighted in the report, I want to shift the conversation now really to execution, right? Because I think one of the biggest questions, and again, it came up just there, is agencies are asking now is like, how do we actually begin and do this, right? Like, how do we get started? What do we do? And again, I believe this is the most important part of our entire discussion today. I think most agencies again understand quantum technologies are strategically important. Most understand, risk associated with waiting too long to get started. I think most recognize that quantum will eventually intersect with broader modernization and planning across government. But many agencies, I think, lack like an operational framework for turning that awareness into action. So what I want to do now is walk through. It's a really simple four-step framework agencies can use to begin building a structured and realistic quantum strategy. And again, I think most importantly, this is not intended to be like a rigid technical methodology. This is really just an operational framework designed specifically for federal environments to kind of help you start to think about what are the steps we need to go through to get ready to be able to integrate quantum into what we're doing. So the first step in this framework is as we've talked, organizational enablement. And I think this is really a key and true foundations because before agencies, I think, can begin to execute against long-term quantum challenges, leadership teams, stakeholders, technical teams really need a foundational understanding of how quantum impacts the mission and how responsibilities will be managed across the enterprise, right? So, as an example, let's say I'm a system owner in a federal agency where my responsibilities are for PQC migration. Well, in order for me to get started, because I probably don't know much about quantum and PQC and those sorts of things, I need to understand, what are the mandates? How do these mandates relate to my work? And what do I need to do and plan and understand in order to be compliant, right? So some fundamental enablement around that needs to happen. The second step, I think, is assessment. Agencies need to begin to identify where quantum creates both operational risk and just as important, mission opportunity, right? That includes, cyber concerns, but I think also broader agency modernization considerations. And Bob, that's what we were just talking about there is, figure out where quantum can actually intersect with what you're doing today and provide real value and start to dive in there. And I think some of that, in order to be able to recognize that, you've got to have the enablement first, right? To be able to pick that out is what I'm thinking. And then the third step is strategic blueprinting, right? And this is where organizations, I think, establish prioritization models, right? Modernization alignment, governance structures, phased execution strategies, and operational roadmaps where the transition can begin to go, right? So hey, we've identified these areas. Now we're going to put this structure in place that we can start to move out against, right? And then I think finally, the fourth step is really institutionalizing this agility because ultimately, quantum readiness, I think, can't be a one time compliance exercise or an isolated modernization effort. Agencies need really adaptable operational and technology frameworks capable of evolving alongside future threats, standards, and mission requirements over time. So this is going to be a one-time thing. This should be something you build out and can continually work and update as you go along. So Bob, when you look at this framework overall, does this reflect the kind of operational approach agencies I think need to begin to think about for kind of long-term quantum readiness? Just curious as to your thoughts there.
Well, I want to say yes. And also, the way you lay it out like this is extremely helpful because the sequencing matters.
Yes.
Um, you know,
Yes.
so many folks like me, you see a problem, you want to fix it. So, and there's still going to be a lot of that, I'm sure. Leaders are tempted to do that. Here's the thing, I'm going to fix it. But in this kind of sequencing, this is where you get the true institutional payoff, and you really optimize things because you put governance in place first, where your vision and mission support leads everything, and you assess risk and opportunity, build the blueprint, and institutionalize. So I like the way you lay this out. The sequencing is extremely important. Do I see any agencies doing this yet? Well, that was kind of gets us back to the GAO report. Um,
Yep.
People need to operationalize this, and I think this framework is a good way to do it.
Again, it's not a rigid structure. I think look at it as a foundation that you can start to build from, right? And build your organization, your agency specific plan around, right? But it just kind of flows to your point, right? You got to start with the enablement. So folks know what they're looking at, maybe what they're required to do, and be able to pick out those sorts of areas where you can integrate quantum or you have to work against the risks of quantum, I think is one of the big things, right? And then and do your opportunity assessment. This is where we can plug it in and then build your blueprint, right? And then all of a sudden, the key thing is it has to be institutionalized. You can't do it as a one-time thing and then be done with it. It's got to be operational over time. Awesome.
Right.
So we'll pause it. Any questions right now as we're going through? I'll take a look at the chat real quick. I know we're getting close here on time, Bob. So I want to make sure if there are any questions, we want to make sure we can get answered here. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, Abby, please. And we'll kind of go through these because I know we'll have some questions at the end, and we want to give a little bit of time to the Caresoft team. But again, the first step in this program is really around organizational enablement, right? I think the biggest thing is, organizations or agencies today can assume quantum readiness starts with technology deployment, right? It really starts with the enablement of your folks, the enablement of your people to make sure they are sure or at least more confident in what they're doing and what they need to be doing. I can't emphasize that enough, right? Is this organizational enablement and creating this ownership and governance layer, I think is also really critical to getting this off the ground and letting folks in the organization know there's support there. And then having this cross-functional modernization alignment piece because it's going to touch every aspect of the organization. Bob, you said earlier, this can't be a CTO, CIO, I'm done sort of project. Business owners need to be involved. System owners need to be involved because they're the ones that can give the insight once they're enabled on this is where quantum can make things a whole lot better for me. And this is how it can affect a lot of downstream types of things. So, Bob, where do you believe agencies may eventually see the greatest operational impact from quantum? I'm just kind of curious as to your thoughts there.
Maybe I'd like to answer that in a time-bound way.
Yeah.
Over the next year, I think the greatest impact will be your IT is going to perform better because you are going to be bringing in these new algorithms and you're going to modernize some of how you do encryption and key management. And that's going to be good for your IT performance. And that's just really rapidly. Then the quantum computing capabilities that are out there already are going to continue to improve. D-Wave does optimization today. It works extremely
Yep.
well with NVIDIA. You can bring them into your enterprise really quickly. Get your vision first, but that's another one that's relatively short term. The grants that the government just gave under the CHIPS Act to big quantum
Yeah.
companies like
I saw that.
IBM, yep, that's going to pay off a
$2 billion there. I
little
saw
bit
that
further.
last week. It's
Yep,
enormous.
yep. So maybe that's 3 years from now. So now's the time to start working through your organizational framework so you can get the use cases together that you're going to want to implement as these things come online and more powerful. So,
We talk about that. We do a lot of work in the post quantum space, and we talk about that a lot with organizations today. Is some say, hey, I don't have to have things migrated until 2030, and you go, okay, great. But by the time you enable your workforce, because they're not enabled at this moment, you put a framework in place to identify your risks. Maybe you run your first discovery and inventory. Then all of a sudden you have to create your prioritization. You have to create your roadmap. You have to understand what technologies are my vendors going to provide that are be post quantum enabled. When are they going to provide those? And what do I do with all my legacy systems that might not be able to support these new algorithms? Do I deprecate them? Do I buy new ones? Do I buy off the shelf ones? Do I build one? There's a lot of planning that has to go on here before you even start migrating anything over to post quantum cryptography. And that doesn't even include the time it's going to take to migrate some of these over. So
Yeah.
organizations, you're right, and you think about the years, need to be thinking about this, at least putting their framework in place, getting the folks trained and enabled, and start to lay out that prioritization roadmap. That needs to happen like now. Not only for post quantum, I think, but if you want to be up and be able to take advantage of all the good things quantum can provide, you need to be doing this now as well.
Yep. Yep.
Next slide, please, Abby. So the second step here, and again, I know we're coming up on time. I want to make sure I get through all of them. But the second step is really taking a look from an organizational perspective, not just at the risks that quantum provides, because we know post-quantum cryptography and a quantum computer can break RSA and the other encryptions, and it's going to cause potential problems or risks for agencies. The whole harvest now, decrypt later problem that's going on now that agencies need to address, but also look at the opportunities that quantum can potentially provide. Again, Bob, we've talked about it: optimization, logistics, improved AI. So you need to have both eyes, or I guess both viewpoints, when you look at an agency. Don't just come in and look at one side of it. Quantum is really a dual play in my mind. There's a lot of risk associated with it, but there's also a great deal of upside associated with it. So as you start to look at and put your plans together, you need to be assessing, I think, both sides of the aisle here. And so, Bob, how should agencies begin thinking about balancing, quantum risk with potential mission opportunity in your mind?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, the leadership of an agency's overall quantum approach, it'd be very good if that is a person from the business side, who understands mission, and that person should be able to focus on what's the opportunity that's going to be coming, and what are our use cases in leveraging quantum sensing and quantum communication and quantum computers. You do need a person, and that person should also understand the risk, of course. But here's where the CIO really needs to take a leadership role, is in executing against the risk and mitigating the risk. There's been so much work done on the right way to do that. It's well known. This is an engineering kind of solution. There are vendors as part of the Carosoft portfolio that can help you discover everywhere where encryption is, and the level of encryption, understand your data, put encryption on top of it, generate encryption keys using quantum effects, segment your networks. All of
Yep.
that is achievable really fast. And CIOs should be leading this. Back to the GAO report, there's awareness in every CIO shop that I know of. Is
Yep.
there action?
Exactly. And we've been working with agencies now, right, from an enablement perspective. And I think the enablement and the governance piece of that is really the first step. I think when you don't have the enablement piece, it leads to hesitation, right? And that leads to inactivity, or it leads to very slow moving on things. So I think this enablement piece, and helping organizations or agencies think about how do you set up the governance, how do you do the cross agency interaction and program, and then how do you enable the folks. If you could start with that, I think things would pick up and move a whole lot quicker, in my mind. And again, understand the budget perspective on the positive side of quantum, but I think getting the enablement piece and start to think about where you can use quantum in current programs and current initiatives to get more value is a critical thing to do. Next slide, please. So then there's the blueprinting piece, Bob, right? where now that we've been able to identify some specific areas, we've assessed the risk, we've assessed the positives. Now, how do we map out an operational roadmap to enable organizations to start to execute against those things that you've been able to find? And I think again, this is another critical thing that the GAO report talked about is in order to hit that blueprinting piece, starts with enablement, right? Understanding the risks and the advantages, and then how do you prioritize and map that out? And I think it's truly looking at where can we start to plug this into existing programs where we're going to see a lot of value, both from a positive perspective as well as from a risk perspective. And so I guess, Bob, when you think about it, what really makes operationalizing quantum readiness particularly difficult inside of federal agencies today?
You know, every leader in every federal agency has one thing in common, no matter what the mission is, and that is they're all busy. All are overworked and have hundreds of things that they need to focus and prioritize on, which makes it so hard. We're adding something new to the agency. You must prepare for this quantum transition. So it gets back again to governance and leadership. But that's just a reality of life in the government. You have
Yeah.
so much work to do. You're so busy doing everything. The alligator closest to the boat gets all the attention. So if you put the right governance strategy in place, you can execute on these kind of plans in the right way, including building your strategic blueprint and then making sure it's executed upon. We mentioned several times the importance of workforce. I think there are ways to let the workforce know what's happening and even help them understand what's important about quantum mechanics in plain
Yep.
English, just so
Exactly.
they're aware of the taxonomy and the terms that are being used. So the planning phase of this and the workforce education all relates to the strategic blueprinting.
Absolutely. And Abby, if you'll go one more slide, please, we'll hit the last step of this. And I think this is really critical to highlight is this is not a one-time compliance, an isolated modernization project. I think you need to really set this up as a long-term goal for the agency to really institutionalize quantum agility. So you're constantly looking at the areas that quantum can help, because I think it's going to truly be revolutionary in how it can help. But then also, what are the risks, and how do you have an enabled workforce and a framework in place to allow you to take advantages of the pluses and then mitigate the risks on the other side. So, Bob, I don't know if you want to add any more there on that piece of this from an institutional perspective. But again, I don't think you can think about it. And this goes to post quantum cryptography, where we talk a lot about needing a crypto agile environment where when the next threat comes up or NIST releases the next algorithm, you can very quickly change it. I think it goes to the plus side as well too, where if a new capability comes out in quantum sensing or a new capability comes out in quantum computing, we can very quickly integrate that in and take advantage of it as an organization. So again, it's not going to be a one-time, one and done sort of project or program.
Yep, total sense. Makes total sense. Nothing to add here in the interest of time, but I do want to say that that crypto analogy, crypto agility analogy you mentioned is exactly the one I was thinking of. There'll
Yep.
be new capabilities that come out. We need to be agile and be able to continue to improve and integrate them.
Wonderful. Well, we've gone through the 4 steps. So what I'll do in the sake of time, Jennifer, I'll turn it back over to you. And I don't know that I see any questions in the Q&A. I'll give it one more shot. We had a good one there earlier. Any Q&A questions that we can answer?
I think we've covered them all.
Awesome. I'll turn it back over to you, Jennifer.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. I know we're a bit past time, but it looks like we've covered everything in the Q&A pod. But if you do have any last thoughts or questions, feel free to drop them in there and we will follow up with you offline. I'd like to thank everyone joining us today and a special thank you to Harvey and Bob for sharing their insights and expertise. We hope this webinar has been informative and valuable for you and your organization. If you have any additional questions or would like more information, please feel free to reach out to Troy Muraw for your quantum inquiries. His contact information is currently displayed on your screen. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.